Right. So let's jump into it today. We're doing a deep dive into DoorDash,
Like that.
but not just like the kind of the surface level stuff.
Right.
We're going to get into like what it's actually like to be a Dasher.
Yeah.
Um, and specifically, we're going to be looking at it from the perspective of somebody who is dashing in a rural area.
Yes. And I think that's a really fascinating angle because a lot of times when we think about these, these gig economy jobs, we're thinking about big cities.
Yeah, big city.
Lots of restaurants, lots of customers. And so.
Hustle and bustle.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is a really unique perspective.
Yeah. It's like a whole nother side to the DoorDash story.
Definitely.
So we've got a Dasher here who's completed over 600 deliveries.
Wow.
And we're going to kind of dig into their experience. So, everybody's seen those ads, right? Like
Yeah.
your own boss at your own hours, like
Easy money, right?
easy money. Yeah, exactly.
Financial freedom.
But, what are the actual pros and cons?
Right. The reality
Yeah.
versus.
The advertising. Exactly.
Yeah. So let's start with the good stuff. I think the thing that a lot of people are drawn to with these apps is the flexibility.
Totally.
Our Dasher source definitely highlighted that as a major plus.
Okay. So they like that they could.
Yeah, you can schedule yourself,
Okay.
in blocks of time. So, on the surface, that sounds pretty great.
Yeah, freedom.
Right.
But I imagine there's got to be a trade-off there.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think.
Stability.
Exactly. If your income is really variable week to week, that can make it really hard to budget and plan ahead.
Yeah, you're not getting like a regular paycheck.
Right. And that's a big part of that larger conversation about the gig economy.
Totally.
Freedom comes at a cost.
Yeah, definitely. And speaking of income, let's talk tips.
Ooh.
That's a big one with DoorDash. I feel like there's always a question of like, how much are people actually tipping?
Right. Well, and they advertise that you keep 100% of your tips.
Okay, that's good.
Which is great. Yeah. On top of the base pay from DoorDash. But what our Dasher source mentioned that was interesting is that there's an earn by time mode.
Earn by time.
Yeah.
I haven't heard of that.
So this is where things get a little tricky.
Okay.
Because it sounds like you're getting an hourly wage.
Right. Okay.
But what our Dasher source revealed is that tips might not be included in that.
Really?
Yeah. So you could end up working an hour and making less than you expected.
So you're like clocking in.
Yeah, it's kind of a hybrid thing.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, and it kind of contradicts that whole like you're an independent contractor thing.
Right.
If you're essentially like an employee for that hour, shouldn't you be guaranteed the tips?
Right, that makes sense.
Yeah, so it's kind of like a weird gray area.
For sure.
And speaking of potential like discrepancies in pay, I think we should talk about the top Dasher status.
Yeah, top Dasher, what is that all about? I've heard that term, but I don't really know what it means.
Right. So basically, it's a tiered system within DoorDash. So Dashers who complete a high number of deliveries and have good ratings, they can achieve this top Dasher status.
Gotcha.
And that unlocks some perks.
Like what?
Well, like you get to dash anytime you're not restricted to those scheduled blocks.
Okay, so more flexibility if you're a top Dasher?
Exactly.
Sounds good.
It sounds appealing.
But is there a downside? There's got to be a downside.
Well, the criteria to become a top Dasher can be pretty demanding.
Okay.
It kind of puts pressure on drivers to really prioritize quantity over other things.
Oh, so you're just like constantly chasing that status.
Yeah, and that can lead to burnout and, potentially not making the best choices.
Gotcha.
And even with the Dash Anytime thing, while it sounds liberating, it can also lead to really unpredictable earnings.
Okay, so flexibility is a double-edged sword.
Exactly.
For sure. Okay, so we've got some flexibility of the tips, the whole top Dasher thing.
Right.
What about other perks? Like, I know they have that payment system. I think it's called Dasher Direct.
Yeah, Dasher Direct card, and that's definitely a plus.
What is it?
It basically allows you to access your earnings instantly.
Oh.
So you don't have to wait for like a weekly payout.
Okay, that's good, because if you're like relying on this income,
right,
you need it now.
Especially if you're doing it full time.
Exactly. Okay, cool. What about if a delivery falls through? Like, what if the restaurant's closed or the order gets canceled?
Oh, yeah, that's a good question. Our Dasher source mentioned that you do get half pay for those situations.
Oh, okay.
So at least you're compensated for your time.
Right, so you're not totally screwed.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay.
Cool. And did our source mention anything about like average earnings or like good pay potential?
Yeah, actually, they said that the pay can be pretty good, especially in these kind of underserved areas
Of interest.
where they're working. They mentioned something called peak pay.
Peak pay? What's that?
It's basically like a bonus incentive
Right.
during really busy periods. So like when demand is high.
Gotcha. So like if not a lot of dashers are out there and there's a ton of orders, they're like, hey, come on, we'll give you a little extra.
Exactly. Yeah. Classic supply and demand.
That's cool. Okay. So we've got like a lot of the sort of the upsides here.
We've got the good stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. But let's get real. Like, what are the downsides? What are the things DoorDash doesn't want you to know?
Right. Let's dig into that.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things our Dasher source mentioned is customer bias. Like,
Oh, yeah.
it seems like DoorDash always sides with the customer.
Right.
Even if a claim is false, there's not really any recourse for the Dasher.
Wow. That's tough. So, like, you could be out there, you deliver the food, and the customer's like, they never showed up.
Exactly.
And you're just like, what?
And there's nothing you can do about it.
Wow.
And, you know, it's kind of a reflection of that bigger issue with these gig platforms. They're so focused on customer satisfaction that they sometimes forget about the workers.
Yeah, you're kind of like out there on your own.
Exactly.
You're a lone wolf.
As a Dasher, yeah. So our Dasher source really stressed the importance of documentation.
Okay.
Like keeping detailed records of your deliveries, maybe even investing in a dash cam.
Ooh, that's a good idea.
Yeah.
Especially these days with all the, like, you got to have proof.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, so we've got the customer bias thing. That's a big one.
Yeah.
Our source mentioned anything else, like, super frustrating.
Oh, yeah. They talked about this thing where DoorDash bundles no-tip orders with better paying ones.
Wait, what?
Yeah, it's kind of sneaky.
So, like, you think you're accepting a decent order, then it turns out one of them's like a 0 tip.
Exactly.
Why would they do that?
Well, they claim it's to make sure all orders get fulfilled, because nobody wants to take a no-tip order.
Right.
But it's super shady because it hides the true earning potential.
Yeah, you don't know what you're getting into.
Right, and it could be seen as manipulative, like tricking Dashers into taking these less desirable orders.
Wow, and I bet that's caused some legal issues too, right?
Oh, yeah, definitely. There are lawsuits about this.
Because it's like, you're supposed to know your pay up front as an independent contractor.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, wow, that's crazy. So we've got like this kind of theme going on here of like lack of transparency and like, they're not really looking out for the Dashers as much as they're looking out for
Customers, yeah.
the customer. Yeah, it's interesting. So like bigger picture here, we're talking about the gig economy, right? And this is kind of like the whole...
Yeah, it's a microcosm of the whole thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And it seems like there's this constant tension between like the flexibility and the freedom.
Right.
But then also like the lack of stability and the lack of protection.
Yeah, and the ethical considerations,
Right.
Is this model actually sustainable?
Yeah. Is it good for the workers? Is it good for the customers? Like,
right.
It's a big question.
And it's not just about DoorDash. It's about all these platforms, Uber, Lyft, Instacart.
Right, the whole thing.
Yeah, the whole gig economy is kind of built on this model.
So for our listener out there, what are your thoughts? What stands out to you as like the most, impactful or concerning part of this?
Yeah. What resonates with you?
We're curious.
And I think it's important to remember that, like, this isn't just some abstract concept.
Right.
There are real people who are doing this work.
Yeah, there's somebody on the other end of that app.
Yeah.
Yeah, when you're ordering your food.
Exactly.
It's easy to forget about that sometimes.
Right, and that's why these conversations are so important,
Yeah.
We need to start thinking critically about the impact of our choices.
Totally. So where do we go from here? We've talked about the pros and cons, the potential pitfalls. Like, what can we as individuals actually do?
Well, I think awareness is huge.
Yeah.
Like the more we understand how these platforms work,
Right.
the better choices we can make.
Yeah, as consumers and as potential workers.
Exactly. And, we can also support policies that protect gig workers.
Right, like making sure they're getting paid fairly.
Yeah.
And that they have some kind of safety net.
Yeah, and we can hold these companies accountable,
Yeah.
Vote with our dollars.
Right. Choose to use platforms that are treating their workers fairly.
Exactly.
And if you're thinking about becoming a Dasher yourself, do your research.
Know your rights.
Know your rights, know the risks.
Yeah.
Make sure you're protecting yourself.
Document everything.
Document everything. Yeah, dash cam maybe?
Yeah, dash cam is a good idea.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
So we've covered a lot of ground here.
We have, yeah.
The good, the bad, the ugly of DoorDash.
Yeah.
But I think the biggest takeaway for me is that this is about more than just one company.
Right. It's a much bigger conversation.
It's about the future of work.
The future of work, yeah.
How we're all going to be working in, 10, 20 years.
And how we consume things.
Exactly.
It's so easy to just like click a button and have something delivered to your door.
Right.
But we need to be aware of the human cost of that convenience.
Yeah, there's a whole system behind that. So as we wrap up here, I want to leave you with a thought to ponder.
Okay.
What if this whole gig economy thing was actually transparent?
Ooh.
What if the workers knew exactly what they were going to get paid?
Right.
The customers knew, like where their money was going.
And the platforms were held accountable.
And platforms were held accountable.
Yeah.
That would be a game changer.
Would it be better for everybody? Would it be worse?
It's a good question to think about.
It is food for thought.
Yeah. And as always, we want to hear from you.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on this?
Have you had any experience with DoorDash or other gig platforms?
Good or bad? We want to know.
Share your stories. Share your thoughts.
Let's keep this conversation going.
Because it's important.
It's important.
Yeah.
All right, folks. Until next time.
Keep on learning.
Keep on learning.